Alien autopsies, files they tried to hide, vertical bar, Richard Doty. For generations, the idea of extraterrestrial life lived at the fringes of science, mocked, dismissed and buried under ridicule. But what if the truth was never out of reach, just buried in plain sight? What if the government knew? What if the evidence wasn't hidden in the stars but locked away in military bunkers, whispered in classified briefings, and entombed in autopsy photos never meant for human eyes? This is not science fiction. This is a story of dark secrets, buried horrors, and the terrifying possibility that we are not alone and never were. Before diving into the chilling revelations of alien autopsies and government cover-ups with Richard Doty, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more mind-bending truths. In 1981, following the quiet death of a retired US government scientist in Albuquerque, a rusted army footlocker was discovered in the attic of his home. It looked ordinary until it was pried open. What lay inside was not the dusty memorabilia of an aging veteran, but a horror show buried under decades of secrecy. Inside were dozens of manila folders, sealed envelopes, and a cache of black and white photographs so disturbing that even hardened military archivists reportedly refused to handle them without gloves. The photos were meticulously labelled, each with dates, anatomical notes and location coordinates stretching back to 1947. They documented autopsies, but not on any known animal or human. These were entities, if they could even be called creatures, that defied every known law of biology. Their bodies were spindly, their limbs long and multi-jointed, with translucent skin that revealed a latticework of dark veins and bluish muscle tissue. Most had oversized, almond-shaped eyes that were pitch black and completely devoid of any reflection, like twin voids staring through the soul of the observer.
And I looked at these things and it didn't look like humans to me. They had 11 different lobes of their brain. Their spinal cord met the brain, had two little bulbs in each side, which they could never figure out what they were. It wasn't like...
One specimen, catalogued as EB2, measured just under 4 feet tall, with no apparent genitalia and a head grossly disproportionate to its body. The notes claimed 12 brain lobes, an anatomical impossibility by every standard of human neurology. Even more shocking, its skull showed no signs of natural suturing, suggesting either an entirely alien method of growth or perhaps something worse. A species that never aged, never changed, and was never born in the way we understand life. And the anomalies didn't end there. Some of the creatures lacked familiar organs. One specimen had no lungs or heart, but a singular, pulsating organ suspended in a cavity filled with a viscous, metallic-looking fluid. There were no vocal cords, no sign of a stomach or intestines. Instead, a series of sacs and tubes suggested a completely foreign method of nourishment, if indeed they even needed to eat. But the most unnerving feature appeared at the base of the skulls. Twin nodules protruded from the back of their heads, rounded, smooth and symmetrical. None of the pathologists at the time could explain them. Theories were scribbled in the margins. Possible external neural ganglia? One doctor wondered. Another speculated they were biological antenna receptors for some kind of psychic or electromagnetic communication. A more chilling interpretation suggested they were implant technology grafted directly into the nervous system by whom? One of the reports included in the trunk was marked "Top Secret, Eyes Only," and contained a handwritten account from an unnamed military medical officer. It referenced a body recovered from a crash site in New Mexico, still faintly alive upon arrival at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Its vitals were nearly imperceptible, but technicians were shocked when it began to move weakly at first, then with more coordination. At first it gestured, simple shapes in the air, circles, triangles, lines. Some thought it was nonsense, reflex spasms. But one linguist recognized a pattern, something akin to ancient proto-symbols. The symbols became structured over days, and then, according to the report, it began to vocalize. The sounds were harsh, clicking, insect-like, but undeniably deliberate. Eventually, under sedation and audio analysis, the being's speech began to mimic human patterns, forming simple words. The first intelligible word it uttered was observe. Days later, it added more: witness, silence, return. Then it stopped responding entirely. Rumours spread among the laboratory staff. Some said the creature knew when it was being watched. Cameras malfunctioned. Clocks skipped seconds. Electronic readings spiked at random. One technician reportedly suffered a seizure while watching it blink. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the body vanished. The official record claimed it had expired during a routine transfer, but several staff members remembered the convoy that left in the middle of the night. No lights, no markings, escorted by unnumbered black vehicles. The photos and documents were never meant to be found. Why that scientist kept them remains a mystery. Some believe he wanted the truth to be discovered. Others think he was haunted, cursed perhaps, by what he had seen. A man who had touched something utterly inhuman and could never forget it. What is clear is this: the photos were real, the autopsies happened, and something, or someone, went to great lengths to bury them. But now they're out, and once you've seen those eyes, those bottomless, soulless eyes, you begin to understand something terrifying. They weren't just visitors. They were watching. They still are. Then came the one that spoke without a mouth. It began not with words, but with a silence so deep, it seemed to listen back. The survivor of the 1,947 Corona, New Mexico crash, recovered just days after the more publicized Roswell incident, was unlike anything ever catalogued by human science. The body was frail, gaunt, and greyish-blue, with wet, glassy skin and enormous, lidless eyes that never blinked. The being was quickly moved under armed escort to a classified installation deep in the desert, later confirmed through leaked documents to be within the perimeters of Los Alamos. They called it Eben 1. For days, Eben 1 did nothing. It didn't speak. It didn't react to pain stimuli. It refused food and water. It had no pulse, no respiration, and no normal body heat, but it watched intently. And then, something even more unsettling happened. People began to hear things. Not out loud, inside, in their minds. Technicians reported hearing phrases that were not their thoughts. Be still, no fear, do not ask. One night, a nurse collapsed in front of the containment unit, sobbing uncontrollably, claiming that Eben 1 had shown her visions of cities drowning in smoke and a sky torn apart by fire. This wasn't a hallucination. This was telepathy, real, invasive, and deliberate. Alarmed, Pentagon officials enacted a classified protocol few even knew existed: assign a single human interface to the being. That person was an Air Force linguist, fluent in more than 6 languages and trained in behavioural analysis. His name has never been officially disclosed. In the documents that survived redaction, he's simply referred to as Liaison Echo. Liaison Echo lived in near isolation with the being for 7 months. They did not speak. But slowly, Eben 1 began to transmit thoughts, images, symbols, feelings, and eventually structured language. Not just English, but universal concepts, mathematical harmonics, gravity maps, and timescales that made no sense to human logic. It was a flood of information, and not all of it could be processed. The most chilling part? Eben 1 knew things it should not have possibly known. It referenced past events in US, military history, including the exact location of nuclear tests that were still classified. It identified individuals by their full names and military serial numbers without ever being told. It even predicted a catastrophic malfunction at a radar station in Alaska 3 days before it occurred. Eben 1 spoke rarely, but when it did, the words came slowly with a kind of echo, as if the voice didn't come from the throat, but from inside the skull. It spoke of star systems humans hadn't yet discovered, of periodic cycles, visits, returns, and something it cryptically referred to as the seeding. According to Liaison Echo's journal, Eben 1 claimed that Earth had been visited not just for decades, but for millennia. We placed the sky signs. You ignored them. We warned. You forgot. We return. When the silence is broken. The implications were staggering. Quietly, the Department of Defense initiated an interagency scramble. The DIA, NSA, OSI, and CIA launched deep black initiatives, none more terrifying than Project Quebec, a joint containment and psychological warfare program designed not to understand EBAN 1, but to control it, or if necessary, destroy it. Project Quebec had one goal: to ensure that no aspect of the being's existence ever reached public awareness. Underground vaults were built. All documentation was air-gapped. Scientists who had direct contact were either transferred to obscure posts or disappeared. One whistleblower later claimed that 6 researchers from the EBAN 1 project died under unusual circumstances in a single year. As for EBAN 1, its transmissions became erratic, violent event. One evening, all monitoring equipment in its holding cell failed simultaneously. Light fixtures exploded. A guard on duty was later found, catatonic, staring at a blank wall, repeating the phrase, "He showed me the black sun." EBAN 1 was sedated, then vanished. Official logs claim it expired, but nobody was ever seen again, just a metal box sealed in concrete, flown out on an unmarked transport with fighter escort. But the worst part wasn't the event itself, it was the residue. Personnel involved with the EBAN project reported lifelong psychological disturbances, hallucinations, insomnia, chronic nosebleeds, and in some cases, the hearing of voices that never stopped. They brought something back, something not physical, not even fully alive in our terms, but awake, watching, listening. EBAN 1 was never a prisoner, it was a probe, an emissary, and maybe even a test. And if what it said was true, then the others are coming. And this time, they won't be alone. And just as we began to listen, our nukes went dark. It started as a rumour, quiet chatter among missile crews, radar operators, and security teams stationed at America's most sensitive military installations. Strange lights in the sky, equipment malfunctions that defied explanation, and worst of all, launch systems are going offline without human intervention.
I thought that was fascinating, but we never could figure out anything other than that it got in and it took fingerprints. Now, there were many cases of UFOs spotted around nuclear weapons facility, launch control facilities, Ellsworth Air Force Base, Maelstrom Air Force Base, and then SAC bases that had nuclear weapons.
Then came the official incident reports, dozens of them, declassified decades later, barely through FOIA requests, redacted into near nonsense, but enough remained to form a pattern. From Ellsworth AFB in South Dakota to Malmstrom AFB in Montana, something was tampering with our nuclear capabilities, not hypothetically, not symbolically, physically. At Malmstrom, in March 1967, 10 nuclear missiles suddenly went offline. Not one, not two, 10 at once. The control panels inside the hardened underground launch control center went dark, then blinked into error mode. Technicians scrambled, panicked, trying to reboot systems that had never failed before. Each missile was fully armed, fully operational, and yet now, dead weight, completely disabled. At the same time, guards on the surface reported seeing a glowing, disc-shaped object hovering silently over the launch facility. No engine noise, no heat signature, no response to radio contact. It simply hovered, observed, and then just as silently vanished. And minutes later, the missiles came back online, as if nothing had happened, except something had. Inspections revealed something deeply disturbing. On one warhead, the internal guidance system had been removed. Not damaged, not destroyed, removed from the inside. The outer casing had no entry marks, no forced screws, no burns, no welding. It was as if the inner components had been surgically extracted through solid metal. The official explanation: equipment malfunction. But the personnel involved weren't buying it. One retired colonel, speaking under condition of anonymity, said it plainly: something got in there, and it wanted us to know it could. And Malmstrom was only the beginning. At Wurtsmith Air Force Base, radar logs showed a craft moving at impossible speeds, then hovering over a weapons storage area before vanishing from the scope in less than a second. The next morning, the security fences surrounding the storage bunkers were bent outward from the inside. The electronic locks had reset to factory settings, despite no network connection. And inside, in the dust near one of the missile containers, investigators found what appeared to be a handprint, but it wasn't human. The print had 2 opposing thumbs, and ridges running diagonally, not fingerprints, but something else, like reptilian skin. Forensic analysts couldn't match it to any known species. The file was sealed within hours. At Ellsworth, a similar event unfolded, but this time with more direct contact. Security teams encountered what they believed were intruders breaching a restricted area. They expected human saboteurs, maybe Soviet agents. But when they arrived, they were met with a beam of white light, so intense it temporarily blinded 3 men, burning their skin through their uniforms. The intruding object lifted into the air completely silent, and darted off at an angle no aircraft should be capable of turning at. Within moments, the base's entire nuclear arsenal locked itself down, initiating a fail-safe protocol that hadn't been used since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then came the audio files. Whispers, caught over the launch center's emergency frequencies. Not voices, not quite. Rhythmic pulses, layered with something that resembled clicks and static, as if a language was trying to break through from behind a wall of interference. A Pentagon acoustic specialist described the recordings as emotionally disruptive. Several personnel who listened to them for extended periods reported nightmares, nosebleeds, and in one case, a complete psychotic break. The implications were terrifying. The most secure weapons in the world, the last line of defense in a global war scenario, were being rendered useless by an unknown, invisible intelligence that had no interest in diplomacy, deterrence, or even secrecy. It didn't hide, it didn't negotiate, it simply acted, and then left. A classified memorandum, dated 1975, suggested something even more disturbing. These events do not appear to be tests, they appear to be messages. A message to whom? Us? Our adversaries? Or perhaps to others watching? The Department of Defense, scrambling for answers, quietly funded the creation of a new initiative, Project Sentinel, a shadow task force combining nuclear command, space surveillance, and psychological operations. Their mission was not to understand the incursions, but to prevent panic. Documents refer to something called Containment Protocol Epsilon, which authorized the use of force, disinformation, and blackmail to silence anyone with first-hand knowledge of these events. But containment may already be impossible. Whatever these entities are, they know our codes, they know our weaknesses, they know how to walk through walls of steel and firewalls of encryption, like shadows through mist. And they've shown us only one certainty. If we ever try to unleash these weapons, we might discover they were never truly ours to begin with. But when one man got too close, they dismantled his sanity. It began with flickers of light on the horizon. Dr. Paul Benowitz, a physicist and electronics expert living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had always been a rational man. He lived near Kirtland Air Force Base, and from the windows of his modest home, he often watched aircraft movements in the distance, jets coming and going, helicopters tracing lazy circles. But one night in 1979, he saw something different, Something that didn't blink, didn't roar, and didn't move like any machine built by man. It hovered in place, glowing faintly, then suddenly split into three and disappeared in complete silence, moving faster than anything we know is possible. Benowitz, a scientist to the core, didn't panic. He built equipment, cameras, infrared sensors, radio frequency detectors. His house transformed into a surveillance fortress. And as the weeks passed, what he saw confirmed his deepest suspicions. Something was operating above and beneath Kirtland AFB, and it had nothing to do with human technology. He recorded orbs, luminous, intelligent spheres that danced silently through the sky, often appearing over Manzano weapons storage area where nuclear materials were housed. He tracked erratic electromagnetic signals. He captured audio of mechanical humming that came from no visible source. And then, one night, something crossed a line.
He just told me, it's UFOs. Years later, I became friends with him. Years later, after I got out, he still owned it. I tried to explain to him that what he saw wasn't, but he would never believe me. He eventually went crazy and he died some years later. But some of what he was seeing was, he took pictures of strange-looking lights in
Paul was alone in his study, watching live surveillance footage from a camera mounted above his back door. As he sipped coffee, the screen flickered, then static, but not ordinary static. Something was embedded in the noise, rhythmic pulses, like a code. The screen cleared briefly, just long enough to show a glowing oval orb floating inside his living room. Inside, no broken glass, no open door, just an impossible presence. Terrified, Paul rushed into the next room, but it was gone. The incident could have been dismissed until a military recon team witnessed it themselves 2 days later, sent to assess Paul's claims under the pretense of joint aerospace surveillance. Witnessed the same thing. A sphere of light, translucent, shimmering, passed through the wall like mist through a mesh screen. They saw it. They reported it. And then the report disappeared. What followed was not protection. It was obliteration. Instead of investigating what Paul had discovered, the government turned its attention to him. Unknown to Paul, a secret psychological operation was launched, codenamed Mirage, aimed not at understanding the phenomenon, but at discrediting the witness. Paul was fed false documents, schematics of supposed alien crafts, CIA leaks, fantastic stories of underground alien bases beneath Archuleta Mesa, UFO battles, genetic experiments. They used his intellect against him, weaving a web of fiction so thick even Paul couldn't tell what was real anymore. He wasn't crazy. He was being made to seem crazy. Agents posed as allies. Some even befriended him. One informant, later revealed to be working with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, routinely fed Paul deliberate disinformation, fueling his research just enough to keep him going, while also ensuring no one else took him seriously. But the cameras never stopped. Paul continued to document unexplained incursions, glowing ovals hovering over civilian neighborhoods, objects materializing inside his own home. Devices in his lab were being tampered with overnight. Once, he returned from a trip to find all of his hard drives wiped, but the footage on analog tape forgotten in a locked box showed a figure, not a human. Thin, grey and angular, it moved without sound through his hallway, pausing at each door as if choosing. The government didn't deny it, they just erased it. Paul's family watched him deteriorate, not because he was delusional, but because reality itself was being rewritten around him. Phone lines clicked, cars idled outside his house at all hours. Lights flickered constantly. The radio whispered names he didn't remember saying aloud. Eventually, even Paul began to question what was real, but he never gave up. In his final, unpublished notes, later recovered by a private researcher, he wrote, "I know what I saw. They know I saw it. The truth is dangerous, not because of what it reveals, but because of what it undoes. Paul's mind wasn't lost, it was dismantled piece by piece by a system more afraid of the truth than the unknown. Because if Paul was right, if these crafts could slip into homes without being noticed, if these beings could pass through walls and buildings and appear whenever they wanted, then everything we believed about safety, control and power would fall apart. And Paul was the first to realize it. Now, decades later, his footage still exists, hidden, suppressed, scattered across forgotten archives. But some of it has leaked. Blurry frames, silent orbs, shadows with no source. But remember, his cameras didn't lie, and neither did the orb that passed through his wall, until something arrived that shouldn't have existed at all. It arrived without warning. In early 1984, a device no larger than a fire extinguisher, cold, metallic, and seamless, was recovered during a deep aerospace tracking anomaly in the Nevada desert. There had been no crash, no impact crater, no wreckage trail. One moment, the skies were clear. The next, the cylinder was just there, buried halfway into the soil like it had been dropped softly, or placed. It made no sound, emitted no heat. It resisted every scan, every probe, every attempt to open it. Scientists at Sandia National Laboratories were the first to receive it, under a black-level clearance protocol known only to a handful of people inside the Department of Energy and the Pentagon. But word quickly travelled up the chain fast. Within days, President Ronald Reagan was flown in for an unscheduled, off-books briefing. There was no media, no motorcade, just a convoy of unmarked vehicles, a sealed airstrip, and an underground bunker buried beneath the Sandia facility. The moment the president saw the device, the tone of the room changed. Reagan, known for his optimism about space and the future, reportedly fell into dead silence. He stared at the object, eyes fixed, not with curiosity, but with dread, because by then the scientists had discovered something. The cylinder was composed of no known element, alloy, or earthly material. Under electron microscopy, its structure shifted, as if alive, responding to the act of being observed. More terrifyingly, internal resonance scans revealed movement, not mechanical, but dimensional. The device was hollow, yes, but what was inside was not physical in the traditional sense. It existed slightly out of phase with reality, as if anchored to our world by a thread. And then they activated it, not intentionally. During a calibration scan, a burst of low-frequency energy passed through the cylinder. It reacted instantly, emitting a pulse of light so intense the surveillance feed burned out. Inside the room, all the electronics stopped working. Watches froze-and unbelievably. Pens lifted into the air. One researcher collapsed, blood leaking from his eyes, whispering over and over, "I saw it all. I saw where we come from." When systems came back online, the cylinder had changed. A compartment previously invisible had opened, revealing a smooth, crystal-like sphere inside, covered in pulsing geometric patterns that shifted too fast for the eye to follow. The best minds on the planet couldn't explain it, but one thing was clear. It was not a weapon, it was a navigator. It contained maps not of continents or oceans, but of time and gravity, charts of wormholes, void spaces, and dark matter channels. Some of these maps predicted future astronomical events, with mathematical certainty: eclipses, gamma bursts, planetary shifts that hadn't happened yet, but did, years later. The message became clear. This was not debris from a crash. It wasn't an accidental drop. This was deliberate. A gift, a warning, a statement. One analyst said it best. They're not coming. They were here first. This planet, it's already occupied. President Reagan was reportedly shaken. In the classified transcript of the meeting, later leaked by a whistleblower known only as Omega, Reagan asked a simple question: "Is this ours now?" To which the lead physicist replied, "It was never ours." and we don't understand it enough to claim ownership. What followed was a security lockdown of unprecedented scale. All records sealed. The device moved to an undisclosed location. Some say Wright-Patterson AFB, others insist it was taken to Raven Rock, the Shadow Command Center beneath Pennsylvania. No one knows for sure. What is known is that every scientist involved was reassigned, silenced, or vanished entirely. One technician later broke down and left a cryptic message in his notebook. The cylinder doesn't map space, it maps possibility, and we are not at the center of it. And that's the most terrifying part. Because if it maps time, if it tracks civilizations, if it knows where intelligence blooms and dies, then it's not just a tool, it's a surveillance device, a cosmic ledger, and Earth was just another entry in an endless cosmic ledger. Since that day in 1984, multiple presidents have been briefed in hushed tones about the device, but none have dared make it public, and perhaps they never will, because if people knew, if they truly understood that something out there had not only been watching us, but had already drawn a line through us on a chart of inevitability, then the fear wouldn't be about aliens invading. It would be about what we were never meant to discover, and why did they let us find it at all? And through it all, the agencies played a game of secrets. There was never a single department, never one chain of command. Instead, what unfolded behind closed doors across the US government in the final decades of the 20th century was a fragmented panic. A quiet war, not against a nation or ideology, but against something unknown, unpredictable, and uncontrollable.
The investigation on him, not only us, but National Security Agency, because he actually tapped in, and this was classified at one time, I don't believe it is classified anymore. He was tapped in to a National Security Agency, an NSA project that was going on base, and which he shouldn't have been able to figure it out, but he did. Very smart guy. So we had to figure out how we're going to get him away from what he was doing. And so we started slowly convincing him, or not really convincing him, but just giving him the idea that this might be just UFOs, extraterrestrials. And he ran with that. And I know I had a lot of criticism about that. I fed him all this disinformation, and I
fed him all this disinformation, and I made him go crazy. Across the NSA, DIA, OC, and CIA, an invisible network of secrets took root. Each agency stumbled across anomalies, craft, beings, and unexplainable events, but none were willing to share their findings. What began as interagency compartmentalization slowly became a cold war of silence, where no one trusted the other to tell the truth. The National Security Agency intercepted signal bursts of non-random transmissions in the 3.2 MHz range, originating from inside US borders, yet non-human in origin, frequencies that pulsed with structured data, encrypted with no decipherable key. They attempted triangulation. The source moved impossibly fast across hundreds of miles within seconds. One analyst quit days later, whispering, "It's not a signal, it's a voice, and it's calling out names." The Defense Intelligence Agency retrieved debris from crash sites of objects that folded under touch, but returned to shape when released. Materials that reversed heat flow, stayed cold in flame, and vibrated at a frequency no human ear could hear, yet made seasoned soldiers cry without reason. One shard was allegedly stored at a site in Colorado Springs. Weeks later, the entire storage facility experienced a 6-minute blackout, during which all security footage was erased and the object vanished. The Office of Special Investigations embedded itself in communities near incident sites. They posed as researchers, reporters, sometimes even neighbors. Their mission wasn't to investigate the phenomenon, it was to contain it, discredit eyewitnesses, spread misinformation, redirect attention. One officer, now retired, claimed in a suppressed deposition that his orders were clear: if they talk, ruin them; if they resist, remove them. The CIA, true to form, dug deeper than anyone. They tracked patterns, mapped sightings, encounters, signal anomalies, and found a chilling correlation: time loss. Dozens of agents reported hours missing from memory, vehicles with melted electronics, and watches stopped at 3:33 a.m. One field report from 1,986 described a team of 4 operatives sent to investigate an electromagnetic spike in New Mexico. They arrived at 11:48 p.m. Their next confirmed transmission came 3 days later. No explanation, no memory, with full-grown beards and sunburns, despite never leaving their vehicle's proximity. And through all of this, retired officers began to speak. Some were old, dying. Others had lost careers, pensions, and families. They had nothing left to protect but the truth. Some people shared blurry videos, yes, but still terrifying. One 28-second clip shows a disc-shaped object hovering silently above a suburban home, pulsing softly, casting no shadow despite the midday sun. In the background, dogs howl, lights flicker. Then the camera distorts, not shaking, not failing, but warping, as if reality itself bent around the craft. The most terrifying part? None of the agencies had full footage. Every copy ends at frame 842. Every copy. Some truths aren't erased. They're redacted by something far beyond our clearance level. In one CIA memo, now partially declassified, an operative writes, "We're not covering it up because we don't believe it. We're covering it up because we do, and we can't stop it." Each agency had pieces of the puzzle. A craft here, a body there, an artifact sealed beneath 5 miles of rock. A voice was heard through scrambled channels, but no one had the whole story. No one could explain why the same 3-digit number 333 kept appearing in logs, radar timestamps, even in the dreams of sleep-deprived agents. The only thing that connected it all was silence. Careers ended, reputations shattered, whistleblowers found dead in hotel rooms, their notes burned, their files gone. Those who persisted were institutionalized, labeled paranoid, delusional, disgraced. But not all truths stay buried. Now in the digital age, fragments have resurfaced. Leaked audio, declassified telexes, unmarked VHS tapes are found in estate sales and old military lockers. One shows a man, clearly terrified, whispering into the camera, "They're not visitors. They've always been here. And some of us, we're not entirely sure we're not theirs." What the intelligence community feared most wasn't just alien contact. It was the slow, creeping realization that humanity may not be in control. That something older, colder, and infinitely more intelligent may already be embedded beneath our cities, inside our systems, maybe even within our minds. The agencies still won't speak, but the truth is bleeding through the cracks, and it's only a matter of time before silence fails. In conclusion, we can no longer ask if it's real. That question no longer matters. The real question is, why do they only show us just enough to scare us, but never enough to help us get ready? Could it be some kind of test, not of belief, but of readiness? A final reckoning with a truth older than our species? Contact isn't coming. It already happened, and we just weren't ready. It never looked like a landing or a speech from the stars. It looked like lights above a missile silo, a whisper in a sealed room, a photo in a dead man's trunk. The universe never needed to shout. It only needed us to finally listen. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe and stick with us as we uncover more hidden secrets.